she really just do that? On a quiet street lined with flickering streetlights, the sound of her heels echoed against the asphalt, sharp and deliberate, each step a heartbeat of defiance. A dark sedan rolled slowly past, tires humming a low, menacing tune. Behind the tinted windows, a police officer's eyes followed her, cold, calculating, the kind of stare that promised trouble before it arrived. But she didn't flinch. She walked straight toward him, and in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't the first time she had faced that uniform, not the first time she had been judged before she spoke, suspected before she moved. But something about tonight was different. There was a tension in the air, thick enough to choke, that made even the passing streetlights seem dimmer, shadows stretching unnaturally across the cracked pavement. People on the sidewalk shuffled away, sensing the storm before it even hit. The officer stepped out of the car, the metallic click of his boots cutting through the silence like a warning. His badge caught a sliver of light, gleaming, a symbol meant to command respect. Yet here, it only fueled the fire burning quietly in her eyes. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, breathing steady. Yet her presence alone spoke volumes. This confrontation wasn't going to end like the others. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice smooth, almost rehearsed. But there was an edge to it, a tension laced with unspoken assumptions. Her lips curled into a small, knowing smile. She knew exactly what he thought, knew exactly what he assumed before she even opened her mouth. And yet, she didn't back down. She stepped closer. "Evening, officer," she replied, voice calm but carrying an intensity that made him pause. Around them, the city seemed to shrink. Neon signs buzzed faintly, a distant siren wailed, but everything felt suspended in that fragile bubble between confrontation and chaos. Her eyes locked with his, and in them, he glimpsed something he wasn't prepared for. A strength that wasn't loud or threatening, but unshakable, a quiet defiance that dared him to cross a line. He cleared his throat. "Do you know why I stopped you?" The words were a trap, designed to provoke fear, designed to assert control. But she didn't hesitate. She didn't apologize. She didn't stammer. She tilted her head slightly, letting the streetlights carve shadows across her face, and simply asked, "Do you?" The pause that followed was heavier than the night itself. His jaw tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. It wasn't just a question. It was a challenge. A mirror reflecting the bias he hadn't even tried to hide. And for a fleeting moment, she saw something behind his eyes. Uncertainty. A crack in the armor he wore so confidently, the realization that she wasn't going to crumble under the weight of his authority. Then came the motion, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. He reached toward his belt, a hand hovering near the glint of metal, a gesture meant to remind her who held power. But before he could finish, she did something no one expected. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood her ground and leaned in slightly, voice steady, eyes unwavering. "You're going to have to do better than that." The words hung in the air like a spark ready to ignite. The officer blinked, momentarily caught off guard. A bead of sweat traced a slow line down his temple, betraying his carefully curated composure. Around them, the night seemed to tighten its grip. The distant hum of the city faded until all that remained was the tension between two people, one wielding assumed authority, the other wielding a courage that refused to bow. Pedestrians had stopped, some recording silently on their phones, some frozen in disbelief. No one expected what came next. The officer's lips moved, but the words faltered. He opened his mouth as if rehearsing an insult, a command, a dismissal, and then paused again, the weight of her gaze pressing down. In that pause, the rules of the usual confrontation shifted. The predictable narrative, the story that had played out countless times before, didn't apply here. Not tonight. She took another step forward, calm, deliberate, Every movement was precise, every breath controlled. Her presence was a challenge not just to him, but to every assumption he had ever carried about power, race, and who should feel fear in moments like this. The officer's hand twitched, then retracted slightly, a subtle sign of the internal battle raging behind his uniform. And then, without warning, she reached into her bag. The motion was deliberate, yet nothing about it screamed threat. A small notebook emerged, pages slightly frayed, filled with notes, incidents, and names. She held it out casually, as if offering a simple conversation starter. "You might want to read this," she said softly, the words carrying a weight that seemed to bend the street itself. The officer's eyes flicked down, then back to her, confusion flickering like lightning across a stormy sky. A subtle shift occurred, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The balance of power that had seemed so firmly in his hands was shifting, tilting in a way he hadn't anticipated. Around them, the city seemed to exhale, a silent acknowledgement that the usual rules no longer applied. Footsteps approached from the side, a witness arriving unnoticed, capturing the moment in silence. The streetlights flickered again, casting long shadows, highlighting the tension that crackled between authority and audacity. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum, every breath a countdown to the unexpected. The officer opened his mouth once more, but this time, the words sounded different. Hesitant, unsure, as if the certainty of his role was dissolving before him. Her eyes never left his, calm, measured, unwavering. She didn't yell, she didn't accuse, she didn't beg for respect. She simply existed in that space, a force of dignity and courage that refused to be ignored. The air between them pulsed, charged with anticipation, and then, just as the world seemed poised to erupt, something unexpected happened. A car door slammed a block away. A distant voice called out. The officer's gaze flicked momentarily to the distraction, and in that split second, the notebook slipped from her hands. It fell softly, landing open on the asphalt, pages splayed like the wings of a trapped bird. The words on the pages caught the light from a nearby street lamp, revealing names, incidents, and dates, a silent testimony of countless confrontations, countless injustices, and countless moments that had been ignored until now. He leaned down instinctively, reaching to pick it up, and in that movement, something unspoken passed between them. The night held its breath. She took a step back, and the tension hung like a delicate wire stretched taut across the street, ready to snap at any moment. The air was thick with possibility, confrontation, accountability, revelation. Yet no one could predict which would emerge first. And then, just as the officer's hand hovered over the notebook, a sound shattered the fragile stillness. A shout from around the corner, sharp and urgent, punctured the charged silence. The officer jerked upright, eyes darting toward the source, muscles tense, instinct ready to explode into action. But she didn't move. She stayed where she was, every inch of her presence a testament to the calm beneath the storm. The camera of the street, the hum of distant traffic, the flicker of streetlights, all seemed to slow, focusing on that single, fragile moment suspended in time. What would happen next? Would the officer follow protocol, erupt in anger, or step back, confronted by a truth he had long avoided? And what would she do when the tension finally broke? When the world finally had to confront the power of her courage? The night seemed endless, holding its secrets close, as if daring someone to act, daring someone to speak. The question lingered, sharp and unyielding. Who really holds power when courage meets authority? And more importantly, who walks away when the unthinkable finally confronts the inevitable? A faint breeze rustled through the fallen pages, the words shimmering under the dim light. In that quiet moment, the street was a stage, and the scene, unlike anything anyone had expected, was far from over. The tension had only just begun to ripple outward, touching every shadow, every corner, every witness in the silent city night. Then, a car horn blared nearby, the sudden noise slicing through the suspense like a knife. The officer's eyes snapped toward the sound, and for the first time, uncertainty replaced his arrogance. And in that uncertainty, a decision loomed. One that would shock everyone, one that would ripple far beyond this empty street, one that would leave every witness questioning what they thought they knew about courage, authority, and justice. And as she stood there, poised, unflinching, the first words that would change everything, the first move that no one could have predicted, were about to unfold. But what happened next? That's a story the night itself seemed reluctant to reveal. The officer froze, the notebook lying between them like a fragile bridge over a chasm of tension. He looked at the words, the names, the dates, evidence of countless incidents all carefully chronicled by her hand, and for the first time, hesitation crept into his posture. His eyes flickered up to hers, searching for the spark of fear he had always expected to see. But she wasn't afraid. Not now, not ever. Her presence radiated a quiet authority, one that didn't come from a badge or uniform, but from a lifetime of surviving, of standing tall when the world tried to bow her down. The streetlights buzzed faintly above, casting flickering shadows that danced across the pavement, stretching long and thin like the threads of tension weaving through the night. Somewhere in the distance, a siren began its low wail, distant yet intrusive, threading its sound through the silence like a reminder that the world was still turning outside this suspended moment. Finally, he reached down, hand hovering over the notebook. And then, something unexpected happened. Instead of closing it, he opened the pages slowly, deliberately, as if he were unwrapping a fragile artifact. The air thickened, heavy with anticipation, and the faint rustle of the pages sounded unnaturally loud against the backdrop of the quiet city. She stepped back slightly, hands loose at her sides, posture calm but alert. Every detail mattered now, the subtle twitch in his jaw, the way his eyes skimmed the names and notes, the minute shifts in his breathing. She could almost feel the tension coiling around him, a storm just beneath the surface. And yet, she didn't move to prod, didn't push. She knew the storm would either erupt or dissolve entirely, depending on how he chose to wield the truth now resting in his hands. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. He read, then reread, occasionally muttering a word under his breath, as if trying to reconcile what he thought he knew with what he was discovering. Then, something shifted. His hand froze mid-page, and his face tightened, an expression caught somewhere between guilt, shock, and disbelief. The notebook wasn't just a record. It was a mirror. A reflection of countless encounters where his own bias, subtle or overt, had shaped the course of events without him even realizing it. She broke the silence first, her voice calm but precise, carrying a weight that made him flinch. "Do you see it now?" she asked, letting her question linger in the air like smoke. "The patterns, the assumptions, the harm that goes unnoticed because it's routine." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed the notebook slowly, almost reverently, and looked up at her. His eyes, previously sharp and controlling, now flickered with something unfamiliar. Doubt. I didn't realize, he murmured almost inaudibly, the words stumbling over themselves like hesitant footsteps in the dark. A tense pause hung between them, broken only by the distant hum of a car engine and the faint rustle of leaves in a soft breeze. She didn't respond, didn't offer comfort or judgment. She simply watched, waiting, allowing the moment to sink into him, to settle in the space between what he thought he was and what he was realizing he had become. Then, just as the tension seemed to teeter on the edge of dissolution, a new sound arrived. Rapid footsteps approaching from the side street, boots striking the pavement in sharp, urgent bursts. Both of them turned instinctively, A group of people emerged, drawn by the earlier commotion, phones in hand, faces lit by the glow of their screens. Some recorded, some whispered, some simply watched, their presence amplifying the gravity of the scene. Among them, a young man stepped forward, face etched with curiosity and concern. He held a small camera, the red recording light blinking steadily. "Everything okay here?" he asked, though his tone betrayed the tension he felt. The question hung between them, not demanding an answer but forcing acknowledgement that this encounter was no longer private. The officer's hand twitched near his belt, a subtle reflex born of habit. But it was slower this time, weighed down by hesitation. The young man's gaze shifted to the notebook, then back to the officer, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like the entire street had collectively exhaled, holding its breath as the balance of authority, courage, and truth wavered delicately. She turned slightly toward the gathering crowd, a small nod of acknowledgement, and then her focus returned to the officer. "It doesn't end here," she said softly. Yet the weight of her words made the street feel smaller, compressed, as if the air itself bent toward her presence. Every encounter, every assumption, it all matters. The officer swallowed hard, the sound loud in the tense night. He seemed to shrink slightly under her gaze, the weight of the notebook, the crowd, and the realization pressing down. And then, in a movement that surprised everyone, he stepped back. Not aggressively, not confrontationally, but with a caution that suggested he was beginning to understand. Beginning to reckon with the truths he had ignored for far too long. The crowd murmured, whispers rippling through the witnesses like wind over dry leaves. Phones recorded, faces reflected shock, disbelief and admiration all at once. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Change wasn't immediate. It wasn't explosive. It began quietly, in the subtle shifts in perception, in the moments when someone who wielded power dared to see the world differently. But just as a tentative calm seemed to settle over the street, a car screeched around the corner, tires shrieking against asphalt. Its headlights cut through the shadows, momentarily blinding everyone in the street. The officer instinctively moved toward cover, hand raised, while she remained rooted, her eyes narrowing against the glare. The car stopped abruptly a few feet away, engine idling, and a figure emerged, hunched slightly, breathing heavily, panic etched into every movement. "You don't understand," the figure shouted, voice cracking with urgency. "They're coming, and they won't stop for anyone." Her heartbeat quickened. A subtle shift from the calm of confrontation to the rush of immediate danger. The crowd began to scatter, whispers turning to murmurs of alarm as the gravity of the new threat pressed down on them. The officer's hesitation vanished, replaced by a sudden surge of focus and adrenaline. For the first time, their attention aligned not as adversaries, but as participants in a larger, more urgent story. She stepped forward, eyes scanning the approaching streets, calculating, measuring. Her mind raced, not with fear, but with strategy. Every lesson, every encounter, every moment of injustice she had catalogued prepared her for times like this. Moments when courage wasn't just a moral choice, but a matter of survival. The young man with the camera lingered, frozen between fear and fascination, capturing the unfolding scene. He didn't speak, but his eyes reflected a silent question. What would she do now? What could anyone do when the stakes escalated from confrontation to chaos? The officer, usually confident and imposing, now looked uncertain, scanning the shadows, processing the threat, and instinctively shifting to follow her lead. For the first time she realized that authority alone wasn't enough. Courage, presence, and clarity could shift dynamics in ways no badge could. The street seemed to tighten around them, buildings looming like silent spectators. The approaching danger wasn't abstract, it was tangible, immediate, a force pressing against the fragile equilibrium that had only just begun to emerge. She knew that one wrong move could unravel everything, not just for herself, but for everyone on the street. And then she saw it, a glint of movement near the far corner, shadowed by the neon glow of a convenience store sign. Someone, was moving fast, intentionally, and with an urgency that left no room for mistake. She signaled subtly to the officer, a gesture small but precise, and he mirrored it, eyes locking with hers in a moment of unspoken coordination. The notebook still lay on the asphalt, pages fluttering in the breeze, a silent testament to the confrontation that had begun this night. But now, it was a backdrop, a reminder of past battles and small victories, while the present demanded immediate action. Footsteps pounded closer, voices shouted, the hum of the city mixing with tension and fear, yet she remained centered, a calm eye in the storm of chaos. Her mind raced through contingencies, escape routes and outcomes, all while maintaining the outward appearance of composure. Every movement, every glance, every subtle shift mattered. And then, a sudden sound, sharp, metallic, and unexpected, echoed across the street. Everyone froze, hearts skipping, breaths held tight in chests. The officer's hand went instinctively to his side, but she didn't move. She tilted her head slightly, listening, analyzing. The sound repeated, closer this time, deliberate, almost taunting. The crowd murmured again, whispers of fear and confusion filling the night air. She felt a flash of anger, but also clarity. Every confrontation she had endured, every injustice she had catalogued, had prepared her for moments like this. Fear could be controlled. Authority could be questioned. Courage could be deliberate. And in that instant, she realized something profound. The fight wasn't just against individual bias or isolated authority. It was against the inertia of expectation, the weight of assumption, the slow-motion acceptance of injustice. Every heartbeat, every step, every glance mattered. And tonight, that realization would be tested in ways she hadn't yet imagined. The approaching shadow moved again, and she inhaled deeply, a deliberate, grounding breath that steadied the chaos around her. Her eyes met the officer's one final time, a silent communication passing between them. This was bigger than either of them alone. And yet they were ready. Ready to confront whatever arrived next, ready to redefine the rules of the street, the city, and the night itself. A sharp cry split the air, and the figure that had caused the initial panic suddenly stumbled into the open, revealing not a threat, but a terrified child, clutching a small, broken toy. The officer and she both exhaled, the tension snapping like a taut string, replaced by shock, relief, and a swirl of complex emotion. The notebook on the asphalt caught the wind again, pages fluttering wildly. In that moment, the scene shifted. From confrontation to realization, from authority to understanding, from fear to an unexpected clarity that left everyone on the street reeling. And she understood fully that courage wasn't just about standing up to a uniform. It wasn't just about proving a point or cataloging injustices. It was about presence. It was about clarity. It was about responding in the moment, seeing the unseen, and acting when the world expects inaction. The officer, for the first time, truly saw her, not as a defiance to his authority, but as a person whose strength transcended the boundaries of expectation. And in that recognition, something shifted, quietly, profoundly, in the very air between them. The city around them resumed its low hum, but the night had changed. Witnesses whispered, some recording, some stunned into silence. And she, standing tall under the flickering streetlights, realized that the true test of courage was only beginning, that the confrontation, the accountability, the reckoning had reached a pivotal point, and what came next would define not just their night, but the echoes it left behind. And in that quiet, electric pause, she glanced down at the notebook, then back at the officer, a single thought crystallizing in her mind. Some truths could no longer remain hidden. Some moments demanded exposure, And tonight, the night itself seemed to hold its breath, ready to reveal what the world wasn't yet ready to see. The street had quieted, but the tension lingered like a ghost, curling in the corners of every shadow and settling in the stillness of the night. The child's sobs had faded into hesitant sniffles, and the officer stood awkwardly, hands slack at his sides, staring at the broken toy as if it could explain everything he had missed until now. She crouched beside the child, murmuring gentle words, her voice soft yet steady, a stark contrast to the raw energy that had crackled between her and the officer just moments before. The crowd began to disperse slowly, murmuring among themselves, some still recording, others frozen in their own internal processing. The notebook lay open on the asphalt, pages fluttering in the wind, catching the pale glow of a nearby streetlight. Names, dates, notes, all a silent testament to countless injustices that had gone unnoticed. She glanced at it once, then shook her head slightly. There was no time to reflect now, not fully. Something in the air had shifted, and the urgency pressed against her like a physical weight. The officer cleared his throat, breaking the fragile calm. I should call someone. Help them. Make sure they're safe, he said, his voice brittle, lacking its usual conviction. But she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched the streets around them, ears tuned to the city's subtle cues, the distant hum of a generator, the occasional bark of a stray dog, the faint rhythm of traffic in the distance. There was movement, subtle but deliberate, and she could feel it in her bones. Something's not right, she finally said, standing slowly, brushing herself off. Her eyes scanned the alleyways and side streets, lingering on the darkened corners where shadows pooled like spilled ink. The officer followed her gaze, frowning. He wanted to dismiss it, to believe the night had calmed, that the confrontation had reached its natural end. But the tension lingered, stubborn and insistent, refusing to be ignored. A sudden rustling came from a dumpster nearby. She tensed, every muscle coiled, senses sharpened. The officer instinctively reached for his belt again, but this time hesitation held him back. Whatever emerged from the shadows this time wasn't a clear threat. It was ambiguous, uncertain, and that ambiguity carried more weight than any certainty ever could. A figure stepped out slowly, hands raised, eyes wide with fear and recognition. It was an older woman, haggard, clutching a torn handbag to her chest. Her voice trembled. I saw what happened. I saw everything, she stammered. The crowd, now thinning, seemed to lean in slightly, drawn by the unexpected twist. She approached cautiously, glancing at the notebook still lying on the ground. You have to be careful. They're watching more than you know. She exchanged a glance with the officer, who looked between the woman and her, confusion etched deep in his features. Who? He asked, the single word hanging, heavy and accusatory. The woman shook her head, voice dropping to a whisper. Not here. Not now. They're always watching, always listening. You think this is about one night, one street? It's bigger, much bigger. A chill ran down her spine. The confrontation she thought had been contained, the moment she had believed was isolated, was suddenly reframed. The implications widened, stretching like shadows at dusk. Every incident catalogued in the notebook, every face in the streets, every whispered complaint, every encounter, they weren't isolated. They were threads in a larger web she hadn't seen until this moment. The officer's jaw tightened. What do you mean? Who are you talking about? His voice carried authority again, but beneath it lingered unease. He wanted answers, but the night offered none yet. The woman hesitated, then leaned closer to her, voice almost conspiratorial. They've been tracking this street, tracking people like you, like him. Anyone who disrupts their narrative. Cameras, patrols, whispers in the right ears. They know when courage shows up, and they move quickly to control it. Her mind raced. The notebook, the confrontation, the child, the fleeting chaos, none of it had been accidental. The weight of this realization pressed on her chest, and a sudden tightness gripped her throat. Every act of courage she had wielded, every note she had taken, every confrontation she had survived, could have been watched, anticipated, manipulated. The officer's posture shifted, less defensive, more tentative. His eyes betrayed the first cracks in the armor of certainty he had built around himself for years. "So, all of this," he said, gesturing toward her, toward the notebook. "They've been—" He couldn't finish. The magnitude of the implication, the idea that the authority he had trusted, the patterns of surveillance, the night itself could be manipulated by forces beyond his perception, left him speechless. A sudden noise, distant but deliberate, snapped both of them to attention. A van engine idling, low and ominous, rolled down the next street over, headlights dim, casting brief, wavering beams across the cracked pavement. The crowd scattered further, whispers growing frantic. The woman from the dumpster clutched her bag tighter, muttering under her breath. "They know you've been noticed. They're coming." Her pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed caution, awareness, strategy. The night had shifted from confrontation to something more sinister, something hidden, something that existed just beyond the reach of the dim streetlights. She glanced at the officer, saw the uncertainty mirrored in his eyes. Authority alone wouldn't save them now. Presence, focus, and the subtle art of anticipation would. The van slowed, stopping partially in the street, its darkened windows hiding its occupants. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a single figure emerged, moving with deliberate, measured steps. Tall, broad, wearing dark clothing that absorbed the faint light, the figure carried itself with a confidence that suggested familiarity with both fear and control. The crowd instinctively took a step back, a ripple of tension running through them. She felt a strange recognition in the figure, an odd familiarity that didn't belong. The hairline, the posture, the deliberate pace, fragments of memory, pieces of encounters long past, flickered across her mind. But it didn't align fully. Something was off. The figure wasn't who she thought, yet the effect was the same. A chilling command over the environment, over the moment, over the energy that had been building all night. The officer shifted slightly forward, hand still near his belt, but hesitated. He had faced threats before, predictable ones, controllable ones, yet this presence carried an intangible weight, a psychological gravity that pressed down without touch. Every instinct screamed caution, but reasoning failed to anchor itself against the sudden unknown. She stepped forward, subtly, positioning herself between the officer and the approaching figure. Her breathing slowed, deliberate, controlled. Every moment mattered. She could feel the wind shift, carrying scents, exhaust fumes, faint perfume, the metallic tang of urban decay. Every sense sharpened. The notebook, still open on the ground, fluttered, reminding her of what had led them here, of what could guide their next actions. The figure stopped a few feet away, tilting their head slightly, as if assessing her, the officer, the environment itself. A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved the figure's lips. "So, this is where courage meets consequence," they said, voice smooth, even, but carrying a hidden edge. Every word was calculated, measured, designed to unsettle, to test, to provoke. A moment passed. The officer swallowed, his presence shrinking slightly under the weight of the stranger's gaze. But she didn't move. She held herself steady, letting the figure's words wash over, dissecting them for meaning, for intent. Her mind raced. Every detail mattered. The pace of the voice, the slight shift in stance, the calculated silence in between words. This was no random encounter. This was orchestration, precision. And suddenly, the confrontation wasn't just about a single act of bias on a single street. It was part of something much larger. The figure's smile widened faintly, eyes scanning the street, the scattered witnesses, the notebook, the child safely held nearby. "I've been watching," they continued, voice calm but threaded with menace. "Everyone sees the surface, the gestures of defiance, the recorded evidence, but few understand the currents beneath, and you've been stirring them." Her pulse thudded, a steady, grounding rhythm amid the sudden surge of adrenaline. Stirring what? She felt a rush of realization, a chill creeping through her spine. The confrontations she had catalogued, the notebook, the courage she had wielded. Perhaps she hadn't just been surviving. Perhaps she had been creating ripples she hadn't yet comprehended. And now, something had noticed. The officer shifted again, unsure whether to intervene, to retreat, or to stand. The strange figure's gaze swept over him briefly, then returned to her as if evaluating not authority but intent, clarity, and resilience. "You have no idea what you've set in motion," they said, then paused, letting the words sink into the charged night air. "And yet, you might be the only one who can see it through." She processed the sentence, the implication, the weight of it. The calm after the earlier confrontation had been an illusion. The night, the city, the patterns of surveillance and control, all had been leading to this. Her courage had drawn attention, her documentation had painted a target, and now a hidden player had entered the stage, reframing everything she thought she understood about power, observation, and consequence. The figure's eyes glinted under the dim streetlights, unreadable, calculating, almost reverent. Then, without another word, they stepped back toward the shadows, blending seamlessly into the darkness, leaving only the faint echo of their presence behind. The van idled once more, then moved away, its engine a low growl fading into the distance. The street fell into an uneasy silence, thicker now, heavier, charged with new awareness. The officer exhaled shakily, eyes still fixed on the space where the figure had disappeared. Who was that?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she bent down, closing the notebook carefully, feeling its weight in her hands, and for the first time that night, allowed herself a slow, reflective breath. The street no longer felt safe, yet the danger was no longer just immediate. It was layered, complex, unseen. The challenge wasn't just authority or bias anymore. It was a network, a system, a force that had been observing, responding, and now challenging her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her eyes lifted to the officer. "This isn't over," she said, voice calm but firm. "It's only just begun." She felt a mixture of fear, clarity, and determination, a coiled energy ready to propel her into the next confrontation. The night had shifted, revealing new players, new stakes, and a reality more complex than she had imagined. And as the wind stirred the notebook's pages once more, fluttering like wings of a restless bird, she realized a chilling truth. Courage alone would not be enough. Insight, strategy, and an understanding of the forces operating in the shadows would be necessary to navigate what lay ahead. A faint light appeared at the end of the street, the glow of an approaching vehicle. Tires crunched over gravel, slow at first, then accelerating. The officer tensed, instincts sharp, but she felt it too. The unmistakable pull of change, of escalation, of a narrative twisting into directions no one had predicted. She inhaled, steadying herself, eyes fixed on the incoming light. The realization settled deep. The true test of tonight wasn't over. It had just evolved, and whatever was coming next would force her to confront not just authority, not just bias, but the unseen currents shaping every encounter, every action, and every choice she had made. The vehicle drew closer, its headlights carving long beams into the darkness. Shadows lengthened, tension thickened, and the city seemed to hold its breath once more. And in that moment, she understood. The night, the streets, the The system itself. None of it was predictable anymore. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. And she had to be ready. The headlights cut through the darkness like knives, slicing the night in two as the approaching vehicle grew closer, engine humming with an almost predatory calm. She tightened her grip on the notebook, the weight of it grounding her even as adrenaline surged through her veins. The street, once quiet except for scattered whispers and distant sirens, now felt alive, tense, pulsing with anticipation, as if the asphalt itself could sense the storm gathering overhead. The officer shifted beside her, his posture tense but no longer commanding. He had been forced into a new role, not as the enforcer, but as a participant in a reality far beyond his training or instincts. He glanced at her once, uncertainty mingling with a hesitant trust. She gave a subtle nod, signaling that they needed to act as one, not as adversaries, not as a civilian versus authority, but as two forces aware that the night was no longer just about a single confrontation. The vehicle slowed, halting at the end of the street, casting long, harsh shadows across the cracked pavement. The engine's growl faded into a low hum, yet the tension it carried remained thick and suffocating. A door opened, slowly, deliberately, and a figure emerged, tall, deliberate, carrying an aura of control that was both magnetic and menacing. The dim glow of the streetlights traced sharp lines across their features, revealing nothing, yet everything, the calculation in their gaze, the precision of every movement. She stepped forward slightly, notebook pressed to her chest, muscles coiled, senses razor-sharp. The street felt smaller now, compressed by anticipation, by the weight of unknown intentions, by the knowledge that every second could tip the balance. Her pulse hammered, yet she maintained a deliberate calm, one that masked the surge of adrenaline that threatened to overwhelm her. The figure paused, scanning the space between them. For a moment nothing moved but shadows and flickering neon. Then the voice came, calm, smooth, carrying an edge of inevitability. "You've been very thorough," it said. The tone was not accusatory but measured, almost clinical, as if analyzing a specimen. But thoroughness can be dangerous, curiosity even more so. The words struck like cold steel. She tightened her jaw, every instinct screaming caution. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice steady but threaded with urgency. "What is this about?" The figure tilted their head, a slow, deliberate motion, as if weighing her reaction. "Names, records, observations. You think you understand the surface of things, but the surface is only a fraction. The deeper currents, the patterns you've just begun to stir, they ripple far beyond what you can see." A sudden gust of wind swept through the street, rattling the loose pages of the notebook and carrying the faint scent of exhaust and rain-damp asphalt. She pressed it tighter, instincts kicking in. Every confrontation she had catalogued, every act of courage, every step she had taken to expose injustice, it wasn't isolated. It was being observed, measured, manipulated, perhaps even anticipated. The officer's hand twitched near his belt, but he remained rooted, eyes darting between her and the figure. Authority, confidence, even bravado, all of it had been stripped away. Now, he existed in the same charged space, equally vulnerable, equally aware that control had shifted to forces they could not fully comprehend. The figure took a slow step forward, the shadows stretching unnaturally around them. "Most people never see the edges of the system," they continued, voice low, precise. "They live within the rhythm, accept what is given, obey what is demanded. But you have forced it to acknowledge your presence, and when the system notices, it responds." A shiver ran down her spine, not from fear but from the weight of comprehension. She understood now. This was no random street encounter, no isolated act of defiance. This confrontation, the notebook, the child, even the strange observer, all of it was part of a larger mechanism, one she had unwittingly activated. The implications pressed on her chest like lead. Every choice she had made, every act of courage catalogued in meticulous detail, had consequences she was only beginning to grasp. The figure's eyes narrowed slightly, catching her gaze with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. You think courage alone is enough. You think standing your ground, documenting injustice, is enough to shift the tide. But the tide is vast, deep, and relentless, and tides can crush even the strongest shorelines. Her pulse surged, the tension spiking, yet she forced herself to breathe, slow, deliberate, centering in the eye of the gathering storm. Her mind raced, tracing connections, calculating risks, assessing the unknown variables that had suddenly multiplied. The officer shifted beside her again, unease written clearly across his face. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to reassert control, but no words emerged. This was no longer about protocol, procedure, or authority. This was something deeper, more pervasive and terrifying in its ambiguity. A sudden movement to the side made her spin, muscles coiled like a predator's. A shadow detached itself from the darker end of the street. Another figure, smaller, hunched slightly, carrying something in their hands. The dim streetlight caught the glint of metal. Panic flared briefly, instinct screaming danger, but she held herself steady. The figure froze, assessing, hesitant, then disappeared again into the darkness. The moment of suspense stretched, thick and suffocating. She felt the weight of every eye in the shadows, every unseen camera, every silent observer who had watched the night unfold from afar. The city itself seemed complicit. The ambient hum of streetlights, the distant sirens, even the faint scuff of wind across littered pavement. All part of the network of observation, a stage set for a reckoning she hadn't yet fully understood. The officer's voice broke the silence, low, uncertain. What do we do? He was no longer commanding. He was questioning, searching for guidance, for insight, for a thread of understanding in the dark tapestry that had suddenly expanded around them. She exhaled slowly, deliberately, weighing every possibility, every risk. We don't react blindly, she said. We observe. We anticipate. Every move they expect us to make has already been calculated. We need to shift the pattern. Take control of what we can control. The figure at the end of the street tilted their head again as if hearing her words across the space, or perhaps sensing the change in energy. A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved their lips. Impressive, they murmured, voice drifting like a shadow across the asphalt. Few understand the chessboard until the pieces are moving against them. You may survive longer than most, but the game has only just begun. Her chest tightened. What game? Who is orchestrating this? She demanded, voice firmer now, edged with the steel of resolve. The figure stepped back, retreating into the shadows, yet their presence lingered like smoke. You will see soon enough, they said, fading into darkness, leaving behind only a whisper of inevitability, a trace of strategy that had been invisible until now. The van's engine purred again in the distance, then drove off slowly, disappearing around a corner, leaving the street hollow and quiet, but charged with the residue of confrontation and revelation. The child, still clinging to a parent who had arrived in the interim, watched with wide eyes, sensing tension though not fully understanding its scale. The witnesses had thinned, whispers echoing faintly as they dispersed, leaving only the heavy, lingering presence of the night itself. She bent down, retrieving the notebook, flipping through the pages with deliberate care. Each name, each date, each observation now felt different, weighted with new implications. What had once been a record of defiance now appeared as a trigger, a signal, a series of threads leading to an unseen network, a hidden force she hadn't anticipated. The officer watched silently, still unsure, still grappling with the enormity of what he had just witnessed. His eyes met hers briefly, and in that fleeting contact, she saw a mixture of fear, awe, and a reluctant recognition. He understood now that the night had shifted, that their roles had transformed, and that the stakes were higher than either of them had imagined. A soft whistle of wind swept through the street, carrying the faint scent of rain yet to come, of asphalt, of distant exhaust. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, flickering across the cracked pavement as if alive, mirroring the tension that had grown between every element of the scene, between witness, observer, authority, and the unseen forces at play. She pressed the notebook to her chest, taking a slow, steadying breath. The confrontation that had begun with a challenge to authority had expanded into something far more complex. A web of observation, influence, and hidden stakes. Every action she had taken, every record she had kept, every step of courage had drawn attention from forces she was only beginning to comprehend. A faint glow appeared at the far end of the street, the soft reflection of headlights against wet asphalt. Movement, subtle, deliberate, suggested that the night's next act was already in motion, that the next revelation, the next confrontation, the next escalation was imminent. The weight of anticipation pressed down, heavy, almost tangible. The officer's hand hovered near the notebook now, uncertain, but she gave him a subtle shake of her head. This was her moment, her fight, her insight guiding the response. Authority could wait. Clarity, observation, and strategy were paramount. The wind gusted again, stirring loose papers, shifting shadows, whispering across the pavement. And in that charged silence, she realized the unspoken truth. The night wasn't just a street. The confrontation wasn't just an incident, and courage alone wouldn't suffice. Something larger, more deliberate, more inevitable was coming. Something that would demand everything she had: insight, resolve, and the strength to navigate a system that was watching, waiting, and calculating every move. The headlights grew closer, the shadows tightened, and the night itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment that would shift everything. And she understood fully that the storm she had unwittingly unleashed was about to break. The first move toward the true climax was imminent. The question was no longer if, but how, and whether she could survive the consequences of what she had started. The headlights cut across the street like molten silver, bouncing off cracked asphalt, reflecting in the puddles left by an earlier rain. Shadows elongated, twisted, and curled around the corners of buildings, hiding shapes that seemed to pulse with life, with intent. She stood rooted, notebook pressed against her chest, heart drumming a rhythm that echoed through every fiber of her being. Each breath was deliberate, a tether to calm in the maelstrom of tension that had become this night. The vehicle slowed to a deliberate crawl, engine a low hum vibrating through the soles of her shoes. The figure from before emerged again, stepping into the pale light, their movements smooth, controlled, almost predatory. Every inch of them exuded authority. Not legal authority, not civic power, but something deeper, primal, and unyielding. They paused a few feet away, letting the distance stretch and thrum with anticipation, like a held breath waiting to be released. "You've been very observant," the figure said, voice low, almost a purr, carrying the weight of knowledge. Too observant, perhaps. Most people don't see the mechanics of control. Most don't notice the currents beneath the water. But you... Their eyes locked with hers. "You've been stirring more than just ripples." Her jaw tightened, pulse surging, but she forced herself to stand steady. "I don't know what you want," she said. Her voice was calm, sharp. "I don't know who you are, but I'm done standing down. You won't intimidate me." The figure's lips curved faintly, almost imperceptibly, but the gesture carried a cold weight. "Intimidation is not my aim," they said. "Understanding is. Recognition, and perhaps correction." She felt the tension coil like steel bands around her chest. Every instinct screamed danger, yet she remained unmoving, observing, calculating. Every step she had taken, every notebook entry, every confrontation, all had led to this moment. She realized, sharply, that this was more than a confrontation with authority. This was a reckoning with the system itself. The officer shifted beside her, hesitating, unsure whether to assert control or retreat. His eyes were wide, reflecting confusion, fear, and awe all at once. For the first time, the balance of power had tilted away from the uniform, away from protocol, towards something more intangible. Insight, courage, presence. The figure took a slow step forward. You think you've seen injustice. You think you've catalogued it, confronted it. But what you don't see is how it reproduces, how it mutates, how it survives even when confronted. Their eyes flicked to the notebook. This, they said, voice low and resonant, is a catalyst, a signal, a spark. And sparks can ignite fires that devour everything in their path. Her grip on the notebook tightened. She could feel the words on the pages, the weight of every name, every incident, every small act of defiance she had catalogued. And now, in this moment, they weren't just records. They were evidence. They were warnings. They were triggers. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her courage had reached far beyond what she had imagined, and now it had drawn attention she could barely comprehend. A sudden noise, a sharp metallic clang, sliced through the tension. Both she and the officer spun toward it. From the shadows, a second figure emerged, moving quickly but deliberately, holding what appeared to be a recording device, small but precise. The device caught the dim light, reflecting it in a sudden flare. The figure paused, then vanished again into the shadows, leaving only the echo of intent behind. The first figure's eyes narrowed. They've been watching, yes, recording, tracking, preparing, but they underestimated you. A faint smirk flickered across their face, then vanished. And now, we see the truth. Her mind raced. What truth? Was it hers? The system's? The hidden network manipulating every move, every outcome? The street felt smaller, suffocating, every breath thick with tension. The notebook's pages fluttered, as if alive, carrying the weight of revelations yet unread, truths yet to be revealed. Enough games, she said finally, voice steady despite the storm inside her. Tell me what this is about. Tell me what you want. The figure stepped closer, and the street seemed to contract around them, the shadows deepening, the air vibrating with latent energy. What I want, they said, voice low, deliberate, is for you to understand, to see the pattern you've begun to disturb, to comprehend the consequences of visibility. They paused, letting the words sink like stones into the pool of tension. You are not just fighting one officer, one street, one night. You are challenging an entire architecture of observation, expectation, and control. She felt a rush of vertigo, a dizzying expansion of comprehension. Every act of courage, every note in her meticulous catalog, every public confrontation, it wasn't isolated. She was a signal in a network, a spark in a system built to extinguish sparks. And now, the system had responded. The officer shifted, unease etched across his face. So, all this, he said, gesturing to the notebook, to the night, to her presence, it's bigger than any of us imagined. The figure nodded slowly. Bigger, more deliberate, more dangerous, and yet, their voice softened almost imperceptibly, yet necessary. Change begins with disruption, and disruption begins with recognition, with courage. Her pulse surged, a fierce rhythm of fear, adrenaline, and clarity. She understood the truth now, in its full, terrifying scale. Courage alone could not dismantle the machinery of observation, the architecture of control. Insight, strategy, and the willingness to act in defiance of expectation were now essential. She could no longer merely catalog injustice. She had to engage with the network, the pattern, the currents beneath the surface. The figure stepped back, melding into the shadows once more. "Remember this night," they said, voice fading, "for it is the first step. The first recognition that the system sees you, responds to you, and perhaps respects you." And just as suddenly they were gone. The headlights disappeared around the corner, the shadows stretched and settled, the street returning to a fragile calm. Yet the energy of revelation lingered, thick and unrelenting. She bent down and closed the notebook carefully, pressing it to her chest. Every page was now charged with new meaning. Every name, every note, every observation was a testament not only to past courage, but to the chain of events she had unwittingly set in motion. The night had revealed more than confrontation. It had revealed responsibility, agency, power, and the looming cost of inaction. The officer exhaled, finally finding words. I don't know if I understand it fully yet, but I see it. I see how big this is. And His voice faltered, then steadied. "I think I need to learn how to see it the way you do." She looked at him, measured, thoughtful. Authority had been stripped away, replaced by comprehension, shared purpose. She nodded once, faintly. "Then start seeing, not just noticing, not just recording, seeing, understanding, and acting when necessary." A breeze swept down the street, shaking loose papers and stirring the shadows. The city hummed quietly around them, the low thrum of distant traffic, the faint rustle of leaves, the echo of the storm that had passed, and the tension that had been released. Yet beneath the quiet, a new awareness pulsed. The system had noticed, the network had responded, and the night, for all its fleeting calm, had only revealed the beginning of a far larger story. She took a slow step back, breathing deliberately, sensing the subtle shift in the street's energy. The confrontation had peaked, the truth had been partially unveiled, and yet the weight of realization pressed deeper. Every choice, every act of courage, every note, every observation. It was all part of a chain reaction that had consequences far beyond her imagination. The officer followed her step, mirroring the slow, careful movements. Together, they stood in the street, the notebook between them, the echoes of revelation vibrating in the air like a low hum. The night stretched around them, charged but slightly less suffocating, a temporary calm after the storm of confrontation and discovery. And in that quiet, reflective moment she realized the fight was far from over. The storm they had confronted tonight had revealed the scale of the system, the depth of observation, the reach of consequence. But it had also revealed the power of presence, of courage, of awareness. The streetlights flickered, shadows danced, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed faintly. The night had shifted, irrevocably. And she knew, with a certainty that sent shivers through her spine, that the coming days would demand more than courage. They would demand clarity, strategy, and unwavering resolve. She looked down at the notebook one last time, fingers tracing the edges of the worn pages. Each entry was a step toward understanding. Each observation, a thread in a larger pattern. And now, that pattern had begun to reveal itself in ways she had not anticipated, in ways that would shape everything to come. The street was quiet, but the air hummed with anticipation. The night, for all its revelations, was only the opening act. The true reckoning, the confrontation with the full weight of the system, had yet to come. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain just enough to feel the weight of the moment. The storm had peaked. The truth had emerged, and now, in the hush of the city night, she felt the first stirrings of what was to come, the gathering momentum of consequence, the inevitability of the next chapter, and the silent, relentless pulse of the world watching, waiting, calculating. And in that quiet, electrified pause, she understood fully. Tonight had changed everything. The first light of dawn crept slowly across the city, brushing the edges of buildings with pale gold. The street that had held the weight of confrontation, fear, and revelation the night before now lay quiet, almost serene, as if it had exhaled for the first time in hours. Puddles reflected the soft light, capturing fleeting fragments of sky and concrete in their still surfaces. She walked slowly, notebook clutched to her chest, each step deliberate, measured. The rhythm of her footsteps echoed softly in the empty street, a counterpoint to the adrenaline that had once surged so violently through her veins. The officer trailed behind her, silent, contemplative. He had changed too, though he might not yet admit it. The rigid lines of authority had softened, replaced by a newfound awareness, a recognition that the world was far more intricate than the procedures and protocols he had relied upon. He glanced at her, and for a fleeting moment there was no hierarchy between them, only the shared imprint of what had unfolded, the resonance of having witnessed and survived a night that had challenged everything they thought they knew. She stopped at a corner where the streetlight flickered weakly, the glow spilling across cracked pavement and worn graffiti. Her eyes lingered on the notebook, its edges frayed, pages worn from the countless moments of courage and observation it had recorded. She opened it once more, letting her fingers brush over the inked words, names, incidents, small victories and minor injustices catalogued with relentless care. Each entry now felt alive in a different way, no longer just documentation, but evidence of impact, proof that presence and attention could alter the course of events in subtle but meaningful ways. A breeze stirred, carrying with it the faint scent of rain yet to fall and the distant hum of the awakening city. She inhaled deeply, letting the weight of the night and the revelations it had brought settle into her mind. The intensity had faded, but the truth remained, shining clearly in the quiet light. The confrontations, the threats, the shadows that had moved unseen, they had all tested her courage, her understanding, her resolve. And in surviving them, she realized that courage wasn't only about defiance in a moment. It was about consistency, about noticing, recording, and acting, even when no one else watched, even when no reward was certain. The officer approached cautiously, his voice low, reflective. I don't know how to say this, but I think I understand now. The system, the rules, they're only part of the story. The real story is what people choose to see, what they choose to act on. And last night, you chose to act. She looked up at him, eyes meeting his with quiet intensity. It's not just about acting, she said. It's about being aware, about seeing the currents beneath the surface and choosing to move with them or against them. Every action has a ripple. Every choice carries weight. They walked together for a few steps in silence, letting the soft dawn light fill the gaps that words could not. The city seemed to breathe around them. Distant sirens, the subtle rustle of leaves, the occasional clatter of shutters being raised for morning business. Life was returning to the streets, but a subtle shift lingered, invisible yet palpable, as if the night had left a mark not just on them, but on the fabric of the neighborhood itself. She stopped at a bench near a small park, worn and unremarkable, yet now charged with significance. Sitting down, she let the notebook rest on her lap, fingertips tracing the edges of the pages. The memories of the night, the confrontation, the mysterious figure, the van, the shadows moving in the corners, seemed distant now, like echoes refracted through the quiet morning. And yet they remained vivid, teaching lessons that no one could erase. The officer took a seat beside her, a respectful distance apart. "Do you ever wonder," he said slowly, almost to himself, "how many moments like last night happen that we never notice? How many sparks go unseen, unacknowledged, and yet they ripple outward anyway. She considered this, gazing at the soft light spilling across puddles and cracked pavement. "Sometimes," she said, voice low, "the most important moments aren't the ones that make headlines or attract attention. They're the small, quiet acts of awareness, the courage to see and respond when no one else will. Those are the sparks that change more than anyone can measure." Her eyes lifted toward the horizon, where the first hints of sun were breaking through the buildings, soft and deliberate, illuminating corners that had been hidden in darkness. She thought of the child, the witnesses, the stranger who had emerged from the shadows and vanished again, leaving only questions and understanding in their wake. Each life, each action, each choice, interwoven into a complex pattern that could never be fully seen at once. She closed the notebook slowly, feeling the weight of it settle in her hands, grounding her. The night's chaos had given way to this moment of reflection, of clarity. And she understood something profound. Courage alone was not enough. But without it, clarity, awareness and action could never have meaning. There was balance in this, a rhythm between observation and participation, between witnessing and acting, between fear and resolve. The officer stood, brushing dust from his uniform, and extended a hand to her. She took it, the gesture simple but significant, a silent acknowledgement of shared experience, of lessons learned, of the subtle but enduring transformation that had taken place. Together they rose, stepping back into the flow of the city now fully awake. She glanced back at the street, now bathed in the soft glow of morning. The shadows had receded, the threats had faded, and yet their memory lingered. A reminder of what had been faced, of what had been understood, and of the responsibility that remained. She realized that the world would always present moments of confrontation, challenges that demanded courage, insight, and resilience. What mattered was not simply the act itself, but the awareness carried into the next moments, the intention behind every choice, and the readiness to see clearly, even when the consequences were unknown. The city breathed around them, vibrant and alive, yet carrying the residue of the night's revelations. Birds began their morning chorus, faint and melodic, cutting through the distant hum of awakening traffic. She felt a quiet peace settle over her, a calm born not of resolution, but of understanding. A recognition that life was a series of ripples, some visible, some hidden, all interconnected. She stopped again at a crosswalk, watching a mother guide her children safely across the street, their laughter bright against the soft light of dawn. She felt the weight of countless acts, small, unnoticed, courageous, that had brought life to this moment. And in that simple scene, she understood that impact was not always immediate, not always visible, but always real. The officer's voice broke her reflection, gentle and uncertain. "Do you think they'll ever see it the way we do, the people who hide in shadows orchestrating? Will they ever understand the meaning of what happened?" She shook her head slightly, a small, thoughtful smile touching her lips. "Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that we do. What matters is that someone sees, someone acts, that the ripple starts, even if it's invisible to those who try to control it." A soft gust of wind stirred the notebook in her hands, rustling the pages like whispered secrets of the night now past. She inhaled deeply, letting the calm settle through her, carrying with it both the weight of experience and the subtle joy of clarity. She realized with quiet certainty that courage, awareness, and choice, even in the smallest moments, were the only truths that could withstand the currents of fear, control, and uncertainty. The city stretched before them, streets and buildings bathed in the gentle light of morning. Life flowed onward, imperceptible yet unstoppable as it always did. And she understood that the night's revelations, the confrontations, the unseen observers, and the moments of courage All of it was part of a continuum, a delicate balance between action and consequence, visibility and shadow. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the dawn wash over her, and whispered to herself, almost as a question, almost as a promise, "What ripples will I leave behind? And who will notice them when I am gone?" The officer stood quietly beside her, and for the first time since the night began, there was no fear, no tension, only shared understanding. Together, they stepped forward into the city, each carrying the weight and the light of the night's lessons. Each step was deliberate, measured, resonant with the knowledge that courage, when combined with awareness and action, could change more than a single street or a single moment. It could alter the rhythm of the currents themselves, subtle yet unyielding, silent yet indelible. And as the sun rose fully over the city, illuminating the streets that had once held shadows and secrets, she felt a quiet resolve settle deep in her chest. The confrontation had ended, the revelations had been faced, and yet the world continued vast and unpredictable, waiting for the next ripple, the next spark, the next act of courage. She lifted her eyes to the horizon, letting the light fill her vision, her mind, and her heart. And in that calm, reflective moment, she understood something profound, that bravery is not only in confrontation, but in the quiet choice to see, to act, and to persist. Even when no one else notices, even when the currents of the world seem overwhelming. The city moved around her, alive, indifferent, yet subtly changed. And she smiled, a soft, knowing smile, as the first rays of the sun reflected in her eyes. Life continued, shadows receded, and the notebook rested securely against her heart, a testament to the night, the courage, and the enduring truth that even in the darkest moments, awareness, presence, and choice could illuminate paths unseen. And as she stepped forward, leaving the street behind, she whispered once more to the morning, a thought meant for the world and for herself. In the end, what we notice, what we act upon, and what we dare to illuminate, that is the measure of who we are, and who we might yet become.